Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about the drought update for the summer, both in the room and online as well. I want to start by acknowledging I'm speaking from the territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. My name is Randene Neill. I'm the Minister of Waterland and Resource Stewardship, also the MLA for the beautiful Powell River Sunshine Coast. I know that so many of us across the province look forward to this time of year to get out and enjoy our lakes and our rivers and our oceans. And as we make the most of the longer, warmer days, we're also continuing to feel the effects of climate change. And in many areas, we're seeing longer stretches without rain, warmer temperatures, and lower than normal water levels. Recent rainfall in the Northeast has improved drought conditions in the area, particularly in the Fort Nelson Basin. But drought is worsening in parts of the southern interior, like the Nicola, the Kettle, the Okanagan, and Slocan Lower Columbia basins, as stream flows continue to decline in those areas. I was in the Okanagan last week. We spoke to a lot of First Nations and farmers, and I stopped to look at the Salmon River, which is really low right now. And that puts a lot of pressure on the lakes and rivers that we depend on, and on the communities, industries, ecosystems, and wildlife that rely on a steady, healthy supply of water year-round. We know how vital water is. It supports everything from food production to firefighting to the fish in our streams. It powers local economies and keeps communities safe and thriving. And we all have a role to play in protecting it. And that's why preparing for drought and helping people get ahead of it is a top priority for our government. This spring, we updated BC's drought and water scarcity response plan to clarify our approach to monitoring drought conditions and water scarcity impacts ahead of the dry season, with an emphasis on early action and support for local decision-making. We're also improving coordination across ministries, investing in practical solutions, working closely with First Nations, industry, and agriculture, and to manage water wisely and protect long-term water security. That includes, for example, a $100 million watershed security fund that supports local water projects to build drought resilience. More than $100 million through the Agricultural Water Infrastructure Program to help farmers and communities build better water storage as well as delivery systems. And more funding for emergency response and community planning to better manage water shortages when they happen. While drought is a significant concern, we also know that conditions vary greatly across this province, and those contrasts are a powerful reminder that climate change is driving more extreme and more unpredictable weather, and we need to be ready for both water shortages and flooding. With shifting weather patterns and increasing pressure on water resources, it is understandable that many people have questions and concerns about what lies ahead. And that's why we remain committed to clear and transparent communication about how water decisions are made across BC. And we are continuing to take early, proactive steps to support communities, including First Nations, as drought conditions evolve. While drought is a naturally occurring period of abnormally dry conditions anywhere, water scarcity is when there's not enough water to meet the needs of people and ecosystems. And though we cannot control drought, we do know that early action will make a big difference when it comes to water scarcity impacts or the amount of water available for ecological and human needs. And that's why we always begin with a voluntary approach, taking proactive steps in high-risk areas and working with water users to reduce demand and maintain stream flows, especially in areas that support fish populations or at risk of long-term harm. In April and May, for example, every single water supplier in BC received a drought preparation letter, including local governments, regional districts, improvement districts, and private water utilities. Drought preparation flyers were sent out to over 29,000 water license holders. We've also sent early preparedness letters to water users in drought-prone watersheds that are important for fish populations. That includes the Coxsila River, the Solom River, Bassett Creek, and as I mentioned earlier, Salmon River watersheds. And in the coming days, we're going to request voluntary water conservation measures from license holders in watersheds of concern as stream flows decline and the risks to fish populations increase. Communications like the ones we've been doing this spring and this summer, are part of a broader effort to encourage voluntary water conservation and planning in drought-prone areas because early action can delay or even avoid the need for stricter regulatory measures. And we've seen this approach work, and this is a perfect example. There's been ongoing success with ranchers and other water users in Coldwater and the Nicola Valley coming together during dry summers and voluntarily reducing their water use. I was just up there last week and I spoke with them. As a result, they've been able to avoid stricter regulations for nearly a decade. Their success is an example of what's possible when we all work together and we get on the same page to reduce our water use. Voluntary conservation remains our first and preferred step, but when the stream flows drop to critical levels and vulnerable species are at risk, we also must consider regulatory action. Temporary protection orders are always issued as a very last resort, used only when voluntary efforts are not enough to protect the fish and aquatic ecosystems from long-lasting harm. When protection orders are necessary, they're guided by science, Indigenous and local knowledge, and socioeconomic analysis. They typically flow on the highest volume water uses to restore flows quickly and as efficiently as possible. We're also supporting communities across BC to develop water, We're also supporting communities across BC to support water scarcity plans so they can be ready for future water shortages. And we'll continue to work with local governments, First Nations, and communities as they implement water restrictions and prepare for a range of conditions. Industry, the ag sector, First Nations are all key partners in managing water, but we all have a role to play in using less water. And we're not going to name names here. Hold on. I need some water. So industry, the agriculture sector, and First Nations are key partners in managing water, but we all have a role to play in using less water. In some BC communities, and we're not naming names, residential water use makes up as much as 70% of total use during the summer months. That's a lot. So that's why even tiny, tiny little changes at the individual level can make a huge difference. So things like watering your lawn less, using a broom instead of a hose to clean your driveway, turning off the tap when you're brushing your teeth, or fixing leaky faucets or toilets. These small changes absolutely add up. So this is a shared challenge, one we can meet together, and by preparing early, working together, and using our water wisely, we can protect our watersheds to help ensure clean, secure supplies. Sorry, you guys, I've totally lost my voice. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave Campbell, head of the River Forecast Center. Dave.
All right. Thank you, Minister Neill. So I'll be providing an update on the seasonal outlook and just in terms of where we're at as we come into the middle part of July and where we're seeing things headed as we go into the summer. So if we go to the next slide, I'll start with a snapshot on the snowpack. Now, a lot of the water that originates into our rivers and lakes in the province starts as snow, and so it's a key component of our annual water balance. We can look at this year's snowpack, and this is a roll-up of all of the automated weather stations around the province. This year in black, and the colors in behind really show the historic range. And so we're really seeing this year coming in with a low snowpack. We started in April with 79% of normal. And we can see a fairly rapid decline in the snow as we melted through the season. So we ended the snow season about 2 to 3 weeks early. And what that means is that water that was available in the snowpack really has moved through the systems early, and that can contribute to pressure as we go through the latter part of the year. As we compare this to last year, the second line there in the lighter color, we can see that we started this year with more snow, but last year we did have a fairly cool spring, which led to a more gradual melt. And so as we sit this part of the season, we are seeing some more adverse conditions this year in comparison to last year. On to the next slide. Another key driver in terms of the drought side of things that we look at is the precipitation. So this is a snapshot of each of the months for the past 4. And we can see a lot of the brown shading throughout most of the province over each of those months really indicates that drier conditions for the majority of this year. We do have some pockets and some periods where we have seen some wetter weather, particularly through March in areas of the Chilcotin. And what doesn't show up here too clearly really is even over the last couple of weeks as we've come into July, we have seen some more improvement in terms of rainfall events, both in the Northeast, so the Peace region, Fort Nelson region, as well as in through the Columbia Mountains. But we can really see that the general pattern has been over that short-term period to see the below normal rainfall. Into the next slide. Another metric we've started to look at more closely this year is what we'll call the standardized precipitation evapotranspiration index. What this really does is it gives us a standardized measure over longer periods of time that incorporate both the precipitation but also the temperature to give us an idea of those overall long-term stresses on the landscape. And so you can see really this is where that longer-term drought is really jumping out across the province, but particularly in that northeast corner where we see very deep levels, both in terms of the 6-month and long term. And so this is another factor that we see coming into this year is that longer term trend in terms of both dry and warm conditions that is impacting that long-term drought. On to the next slide. Stream flow, another important metric looking at how much water is in the creeks and rivers around the province. So on the left is a current snapshot of the Water Survey of Canada real-time gauges. It gives us an idea of what stream flow is looking like. Where we see the reds and oranges, that's where we've got extremely low flow for this time of year. And we can see that really popping up through a lot of the southern part of the province. On the right is the same information, but showing as a time series. So it really looks at this, the proportion of each of these color codes over the last year. And again, where we see areas in that yellow, orange, and red, that's where we have well below or below normal flow. And so we can see the drought last year on the far left there, period of midwinter drought through the January-February period. And then on the far right, the growth in those higher metrics over the past few months. We're sitting now with almost 2/3 of the gauges across the province at below normal level, and about 40% of them at that well below normal level, so below the 10th percentile. On to the next slide. As we look at the seasonal forecast for this year from Environment and Climate Change Canada, we continue to see that pressure with an increased chance of a warm summer over the next 3 months. Pretty much across the province, but certainly a higher likelihood as we get into the southern parts. On the right here, we have the seasonal precipitation forecast, which is showing increased chance of drier weather through the eastern parts of the province. But one of the concerns that we look at this really is in terms of the forecast skill tends to be low. And so generally when we look at the seasonal forecast, looking at the expectation of summer being the dry season and really putting that pressure on the water resource. And the weather will continue to play an important role as we go through the next months here to really where we head in terms of the season. Next slide. So when we look at current drought levels across the province right now, we see most of the province in elevated levels, so 62% at either level 2 or level 3. At the moment, we have no areas that are above that level 3 level, and that really has been a relation to some of the improving trend up in the Northeast over the past few weeks. The converse of that is we have seen growing and increasing drought levels through the southern parts of the province, particularly through the Okanagan and the Kootenay region. On to the next slide. So just wrapping up in summary, we do see those antecedent or conditions that we're coming into this year with is increasing the risk across the province for drought. We're starting to see those elevated levels across the province. And while some of the recent rainfall has been beneficial, we really need to see much more sustained, longer term, on the order of months or even a season of wet weather to really make up the deficits that we've seen over the long range. As I mentioned, the weather really will be continue to be critical as we go forward into the summer. And as we go through the season, we can expect to see, particularly in those snowmelt dominated rivers where the water stored in the landscape is gone, that we'll continue to see decreasing flows as we go into the coming months. So with that, I'll wrap up and pass it back to Minister Neill. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. We're happy to take questions, and I also forgot to mention that
service is here if you have any questions about wildfire as well.
Thank you, Minister. As a reminder for reporters on the phone, please press *1 to enter the queue. That's *1 to ask a question. For media in the room, please line up at the microphone provided and wait to be called. Please make sure to provide your full name and outlet. Media will be limited to 1 question and 1 follow-up. We're going to start in the room. Please go ahead.
Hi, Minister. Lisa Tibbo with Global News. So, I mean, you talk about, we're monitoring some drought levels. You've changed some water level monitoring. What do you want people to take away from today? What is the message that you're trying to get to people?
I think the message is that we all have a critical role to conserving our water this summer, especially in areas where we're facing water scarcity. So we're asking everybody listening today to be able to do those tiny little things that they may think won't make a difference, but it absolutely does. So for example, if you're washing your fruit or vegetables, don't do it in the sink, do it in a bowl, and then use that bowl and go dump it on your tomatoes or raspberries. Don't wash your car every weekend. Don't water your lawn every day. Follow the rules and restrictions that are put in place to voluntarily reduce water. That will help conserve our water during August and September, when we typically have the highest level of drought conditions, and it's before the rains come. So these are things that we can all take that allows us not to make those tough choices to have to turn off the taps, for example, for different industries or different users. We need to make sure that we can do this together so we can conserve the water that we have, so that we can continue to use it, that everybody can continue to use it.
I mean, on that, you're asking people to do things voluntarily, but every year for the past few years, we've had kind of this same discussion leading into summer that we haven't had enough rain. Some areas are facing drought. Like, why not bring in restrictions preemptively that will just come into effect in summers for the future, so that we can kind of bypass this plea to get people to do things voluntarily?
Yeah, we could absolutely do that. That's a good question. And there are some local governments that maintain, drought warning levels year round, just to get people used to it. And when I was a kid, when my Saskatchewan cousins came to visit, they knew water conservation way back then. Like, they would have a shower, turn it on, get wet, turn it off, soap up, turn it on, things that we never ever did here in BC because we didn't have to do. And now we have to. So if people can take those measures year round, that would be fabulous. But at this point, we're making the decision just to try and voluntarily reduce the usage when we need to do it.
For our next question, we're going to head to the phones, unless we don't have, no, okay. Our first question on the phones is Rob Buffum, CTV Vancouver. Please go ahead.
Oh, hi, Minister. Thanks for taking my question. My understanding from this press conference is that things are worse for a few reasons in terms of drought this year compared to last. I'm curious, are you able to quantify in some way how much worse they currently are, and how concerned are you that we're going to be in big trouble?
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for the question. I'll give you the short answer, and then I'll turn it over to the technical team. As we mentioned, drought is something that occurs naturally, but in some parts of BC, we've been in drought for several years. And when it takes several years to get into something, we know it's going to take several years to get out of it, if we get out of it. So there's areas that are experiencing severe drought. We've seen that by the number of forest fires that we have every year. So at this point, I think we're being as cautious as possible. We obviously hope that we're not going to have a horribly dry, drought-filled, water scarcity summer, but we could. So we want to prepare for that, absolutely. But I'm going to turn it over to Connie Chapman to see if she has anything to add.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister, and thank you for the question. I think one thing we need to keep in mind is each drought year is going to be a little different. As Dave Campbell mentioned early on in the presentation, we started with a below average seasonal snowpack. Though it was higher than last year, it melted quicker, and all of those conditions feed into how drought escalates across the province. In addition, a lot of it is determined by precipitation and how those flows show up or don't show up. So one thing I think that we need to look at is that localized specific sort of examples that may be present, but recognizing that conditions can change quite quickly for the better or the worse. We get a couple weeks of rain, and that's going to definitely shift our way out of drought conditions, or we can see a prolonged period of dry where our drought conditions would continue to increase. One thing I will note is over specifically the last 3 to 4 years, we have seen the continuation of drought conditions and the precipitation deficit increase. And that is something that we are watching closely, but definitely feeds into just how we respond to drought. One thing that we'll want to see is that resiliency be brought into the different communities and sectors that are reliant on water. And these are pieces that we are slowly working towards every time we have a drought season.
Follow up Yeah, I had a follow-up for the minister. I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned earlier that you didn't want to sort of name names of communities, but you did reference that 70% of the total water use in some places was because of residents basically using the water, if I understood it correctly. I'd invite you to identify any of the communities where this is a big problem, but also failing that, I guess. What is your message to these communities that don't seem to be getting the message so far?
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Yeah, there are a few communities in BC where in the summer, up to 70% of the water usage is residential water usage. So again, my message to all of those people is that what you do makes a significant difference to the amount of water the whole community has. And we have to remember that we have to share our water not with other residents, but farmers, agriculture, industry, all of those things. So the less we can consume water in those months where water is getting scarce, the better we're going to all be. So the examples that I gave earlier, using a broom instead of a hose to clean off your driveway, for example. Don't wash your car every weekend. Don't water your lawn. We know that lawns can survive. Those tiny little changes that you think may not make a difference really do truly make a difference in the summer when we're looking at less water.
Our next question is for Georgie Smythe, CBC. Please go ahead.
Hi, I just was hoping someone might reflect on what the changes to the way that we are monitoring drought and water scarcity, how the public should think about the seriousness of this issue, that we've had to really, break down the data that we have, what it sort of tells people about how seriously they should take this, and how much effort is being put now into monitoring, these two numbers.
I'm going to let Connie answer in a second, but I do want to say, I think when we're talking about climate change and the climate crisis we're in, whether it's flooding or drought or wildfires, we all have a responsibility to take it incredibly serious and do everything we can to reduce the risk of all of those things happening. Connie has a really good analogy, though, so I'll let her finish.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for the question. One thing with the way that drought is being monitored and looked at this year with data is really to distinguish between drought. So what is that natural occurring phenomenon of lack of precipitation and the water available for those streams, versus the water scarcity component, which is how much water is needed for human and aquatic ecosystem and health. As mentioned, water scarcity can be driven from many factors. One of them being drought and or worsened by drought. So with water scarcity, you can have a water scarcity event during the times of a flood, say if a water main were to break and you weren't able to transport that water from point A to point B. If you had the same water main break in the middle of summer in a severe drought condition, you might have further impacts from that. And so what we are really looking for is to be able to identify those water scarcity challenges and take action on it. What this is going to help support is building the resiliency into communities, industry, the agricultural sector, and just how we approach water and how we use it on an annual type basis.
I do, yeah. I'm just hoping to kind of build a little bit on Alyssa's question about water restrictions, knowing that it is our job to simplify this for the public, but it almost seems confusing that it's things are serious enough that people should be changing their behaviors, but not serious enough that they should be made to change their behaviors. How do you sort of reconcile that, somewhat confusing messaging, that things are bad, but they're not that bad? What's the threshold? How do you make the average person understand how serious to take this today?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good follow-up question. I think the best answer, and then I'll let Connie follow up as well, is that we find that voluntary conservation use works incredibly well. As I mentioned earlier, in the Nicola Valley when we got all of those ranchers together to say, look, unless you guys figure out what's important and what the values are around water, we're going to have to turn off the taps. And so they met and they voluntarily did the steps to ensure for the past 10 years, we haven't had to go in there and issue a temporary protection order. So we know that when we ask people and start that education early to understand that if they do this on a voluntary basis, because they know it's the right thing to do to help prevent water scarcity in the summer, that they will continue to do it. If they're forced to do it, they don't want to do it. So this is an education process. This is something that we do every single year. I remember when I was a reporter, I attended these drought sessions as well. So this is levels of education so we can get people to understand that it's always a serious issue, but it's also up to us to work to make the difference and to protect the water that we have. But I'll let Connie follow up if she has anything to say.
Thank you, Minister. One of the challenges with this is that it's not a one size fits all sort of situation. So we can have a drought level within an area, and we can have two different communities feeling very different impacts from that drought level. One area may have resiliency built in, a large reservoir, adequate infrastructure, and water restriction in place, whereas another community may not have those sorts of things. As the minister mentioned, this is an educational space, but it's also that long-term change. As the province continues to grow and as we continue to see the impacts from climate, we know that we're going to experience greater extremes of weather, and that means too little water and too much water throughout the times of the year. And so as we consciously think as to how we're utilizing that water, all it's going to do is help support us build that resiliency, but ensure that there is water to support the aquatic ecosystem, human health, agriculture, and industry sectors for years to come.
Raymond, CTV Vancouver Island. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I'm just wondering if you can speak specifically to the concerns on Vancouver Island regarding drought and this water scarcity messaging, if you can just drive in on that area.
Yes, thank you for your question. I'll let Connie answer that as well at the end. There are specific areas on Vancouver Island that have experienced drought for a long time. Solom River and also Coxsila. And the Coxsila watershed is one of the first in the province to actually come together because we understand the severe drought issues in that area and in that watershed, where all of the users, First Nations, industry, agriculture, local governments, have come together to come up with a kind of community watershed table, for example, to really set what the values are to ensure that that area doesn't run out of water. The Cowichan Weir is a big part of that as well. But those are the kind of biggest pinch points, biggest water scarcity areas on Vancouver Island. That doesn't mean potentially that won't change in the future, that we may not see more areas of drought on more areas of the island. But for now, those are the two main areas that people on Vancouver Island really need to plan for and reduce their usage for. And I'll let Connie follow up.
Thank you, Minister. So on Vancouver Island, there are a couple factors to keep in mind just in regards to the low-lying elevations. So our snowpack on Vancouver Island, we often see start melt sooner than we see throughout the rest of BC. And then also the geology and how our aquifers are structured and so forth. We are aware of systems on Vancouver Island, Solom River being one of them, Coxsila being another one, that have experienced drought and water scarcity challenges over the last number of years. As I mentioned before in my example, depending on where you are on the island, the resiliency built within the community, the resiliency built within your household, drought is going to impact you differently along with water scarcity. So if you were to look at the Capital Regional District, they have a reservoir. The reservoir health is good. There's adequate water within that to support that region in supplying water throughout these dry times of the season. Now, if you're an individual directly pulling from a stream, your experience is going to be very different, as you don't have that reservoir, you don't have that battery to necessarily keep going. And these are factors that, as I mentioned earlier, we need to take into consideration. And these just highlight the localized specific of water scarcity. So even though we may be in a drought level 2, a drought level 3, each area is going to be different. And this is where local governments, communities, and others can really take action by building in that resiliency.
Yes, please. Thank you. Just more on the water scarcity and the messaging for voluntary conservation. You know, how do you drive home this care factor? For example, you're just pointing out that the Capital Regional District has a healthy reservoir right now. Why should someone in the CRD care about conserving water compared to maybe some other areas where the messaging, you know, they experience the impact of not doing so more quickly or more easily? Again, just more on that care factor for the water conservation message.
Thanks for your question. I think, you know, the simple answer is a reservoir may look really good right now, and if everybody knows that and ignores reducing their water usage, then by late August, we can be in a completely different situation. And then we have to go to an extreme level of water scarcity. Isn't it better for everyone to take the measures now just a little bit and get used to taking those measures in a way that prevents us from ever drawing low on the reservoir, for example, or trying to dry up a stream? It's these types of opportunities, and this is why we hold these news conferences now, especially when it's really hot outside and it's going to get hotter tomorrow, is we really want people to understand that little differences make a huge difference to our water supply. And so doing that every single day, especially during the summer when we're at risk of water scarcity, are things that we can all do to contribute to a healthy water supply that everybody can use year-round.
For our next question, we're going to Chuck Chang, Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. This question is for the BC Wildfire Service, if possible. The latest update says there's a significant risk of an outflow pattern for Vancouver Island. I was wondering, for the coastal region, I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about the risk that this presents in terms of potentially driving more fire behavior on the coastal areas. Thank you.
Cliff Chapman, is Cliff on the line? There he is.
Yeah, thank you, Minister, and thank you for the question. It's a really great question around the change from what we would call our predominant winds, which generally come off the ocean and push everything to the east, and then an outflow pattern actually switches that and pulls wind towards the ocean, which can be problematic from a fire behavior perspective. Given the conditions that we've seen so far in the Coastal Fire Center, we don't anticipate that to be dire, just because we have seen some precip in the system over the course of the last 6 to 8 weeks. Not enough. There is still lots of challenges there, but we're not seeing the potential for, I would say, extreme fire behavior. Saying that, as we saw this weekend with the fires in the Kamloops Fire Center, there are pockets where we can see that sort of high to extreme fire behavior occur, kind of within a pocket that maybe around it it's seen precipitation and rain, but there are pockets across BC that remain very dry, and some of those exist on the island and within the Coastal Fire Center on the mainland. So we're keeping an eye on it. We have a significant amount of resources available for those pockets that may see a fire, like we saw this weekend in and around the Princeton and Lower Similkameen area. So that we can get on those fires aggressively and we can support them with additional resources should they get a little bit bigger, as a couple did this weekend. But we are seeing that we're having success in suppression, which is a good sign in BC for mid-July, because in the last number of years, we have really struggled in July and August. Having successful suppression efforts because of the drought conditions that we're speaking about today, as well as the dryness of our fuels, which is our fuel drought conditions, which is also quite extreme across BC, in particular in the south. So really good question. Outflow winds are something that we pay close attention to, and we are aware that there is the potential for that, and we have resources kind of spread throughout the Coastal Fire Center and all of BC ready and anticipating fire starts, and so we can get on them quick.
Yes, sorry. Also for the wildfire service, the forecast that's being presented by the province and the River Forecast Center about continuing, the possibility of warmer summers. Obviously, water conservation, things like that, in terms of protecting the fish and wildlife is also very important. But I think a lot of people also worry about the potential of this driving the risk of wildfires going forward. What is your assessment in terms of, what's your reaction to the fact that, the possibility of challenging drought conditions in the southern interior and the southeast? And, are you preparing, what are you doing to prepare for that possibility that that area may see more challenges if wildfires do sprout out?
Yeah, thank you. I'll take this question as well. Really, really good question, and I'll start with the potential. So, the good news is it's July 14th, so we're halfway through July. In some of our challenging fire seasons, 2023, 2021, 2018, 2017, our fire season was well underway at this point in the summer, and I would say it was generally widespread, kind of up and down the spine of the province in the interior. We have had a really difficult fire season in the Prince George Fire Center so far this year. In the southern half of the province, we've had a couple of fires, including the ones that I referenced from this weekend in and around Princeton. But generally speaking, we have had great success in initial attack this fire season so far. And as the summer pushes on, it gets us closer to those shorter burning days. So what I mean by that is that as we know, in June, end of June and beginning of July are the longest days of the year. That means that the fuels have longer to dry. The weather has a bigger impact during the daylight hours, and the heating can continue into the night and overnight periods. As we push into August, the days get shorter and the burning window gets shorter. Now, climate change has started to shift that, where we still can see significant fire behavior in September and even into October. But the closer, the longer we get into July and into August, the shorter our fire season is going to be across the province. And so we have been fortunate in BC this year to see conditions that have allowed us to be successful in initial attack. We've still had over 500 fires in BC this year, but fortunately, we have been able to get on those quickly. The second part of your question, which is what have we done to prepare? We continue to evolve as an organization in seeing what's out there and what is really innovative in the space of wildfire. This past weekend, one of the big successes in a fire that was in the Southeast Fire Center, as well as the two Kamloops fires, was our night vision technology that we've partnered with aviation companies as well as our own organization to fly heavy helicopters at night and suppress fires at night when the fire environment is much easier for us and is more receptive to water and more receptive to the work that we do on the ground. So just one example would be night vision technology. We obviously continue to evolve our air tanker fleet. We had both the retardant-based aircraft as well as the amphibious aircraft, which can pick up water off lakes, really, really attacking the fires that we've had over this weekend. And that will be our continued plan as we push forward for the rest of the summer, is aggressive initial attack, really trying to catch the fires while they're small so that we can manage them and they don't get the opportunity to become 10, 20, 50,000 hectare fires, which right now, fortunately, we don't have the conditions for that in very many pockets of BC. Your question about the Southeast Fire Center and the southeast corner of BC, that is one area that we're keeping a really close eye on as the Wildfire Service. We have seen some pretty significant temperatures there over the last 3 weeks. They are in a drying trend. The forecast does show that we might see this kind of unsettled pattern for the next 7 days, where we're going to see a couple hot days followed by some cloudy days. Not a lot of precip, but certainly going to help us and help contain fires and help us when we're using aggressive initial attack. So we are prepared. We have resources on in every fire center in every zone ready for that aggressive initial attack, and I feel confident with the conditions right now that we're going to get on things and we're going to get on them fast.
That's good. The Tyee, please go ahead.
Hi there. I'm just trying to better understand the changes to drought reporting and what it means for how we understand drought versus water scarcity. I'm curious about the improvement in the drought rating in the Northeast. And I'm wondering if you can explain in a little more detail how that's been affected by these changes. Is it a matter of separating out other factors? And is one of those factors the amount of water that's being used in the Northeast for industry?
I will tackle the first part of that question. Thanks, Amanda, and then I'll turn it over to Connie. We're trying to figure out how to explain these changes. One of the ways that we describe the changes to drought reporting is, for example, the Richter scale for earthquakes. If there's an earthquake reported that's, say, 3.4 on the Richter scale, for example, 3.4 doesn't tell us how hard people will feel a shake. They won't tell us if there's going to be any damage to the land. What it is, it's a measurement for how we can measure the size of earthquakes when they happen. And similar with the drought forecast, it's a measurement for us in real time to measure against other drought areas and historical records in the past. So that's what kind of the new drought reporting is about. The Northeast, we did, as Cliff mentioned a couple weeks ago, got some really heavy rains there, which really dampened the fire risk in that area. So that was one of the reasons that drought level risk has gone down. But if I got all that information wrong, Connie is going to correct me.
Thank you, Minister. So I'll just start on the Northeast piece, but also just in regards to the water scarcity component. A factor of water scarcity is how much water is being utilized, and this can be through industry, this could be through local governments, this could be through the agriculture sector. There are many individuals across the province that are very reliant and dependent on that water for, the driving factors behind the economy within BC. One of the key things with trying to delineate these two pieces of drought and water scarcity is to have that concrete understanding of how much water is being used, and is that a driving factor into the water scarcity component. So this is a space where ongoing work is continuing to happen with a variety of different industries, the ag sector, the oil and gas sector, and others, to understand what type of water is being utilized or not utilized. The BC Energy Regulator is the primary regulator for the oil and gas sector up in the Northeast. And under their legislation, they already have tools that they can utilize to help protect aquatic ecosystems. And those tools are currently in place for a couple of the watersheds. As we move forward and working with industry, there's a lot of work happening in regards to supporting them and building resilience into their infrastructure. So closed systems where necessary, looking at recycled water and other sorts of manners to reduce their water use and consumption during times of the year where water is not available. Alternatively, looking at their operations as to whether or not they can do more operations during times of year where we know we have a greater availability of water within that system. The drought level, as mentioned before, that is a point in time marker that is going to provide us an understanding of an additional component that may be driving water scarcity, but may not be the only factor into water scarcity. And as Minister Neill mentioned, the Richter scale example is one of the examples that we've been using. The Richter scale really tells us how much that ground is shaking, but it doesn't tell us how many buildings are going to collapse or what the impacts is. And this is where we're driving with that water scarcity piece to understand where those impacts are going to happen.
I do, and thank you, Connie. It might take me a bit to get my head around this new system, but I appreciate the explanation. I guess I'm also wondering, big picture, in the Northeast, we've seen a multi-year drought, but there's also been reports using data from the BC Energy Regulator that shows that water use by industry has actually increased dramatically. So I'm curious, maybe this is a question for the minister, is there a threshold where the province would step in and rein in some of that water use by industry through regulation or other mandatory factors?
Thank you. Thanks. Yes, I think that nothing is off the table in this case. Water is such a precious commodity for us, not just in this province, but around the world. And so we have to prioritize water. I think that's very clear when we talk to people that water is a priority. And, this was a bit of a threat when the whole, Donald Trump tariff thing started, is he going to come for our water? So these are all questions that we have to think about and that we have to pay attention to. I think in terms of going back to whether it's industry or agriculture or residential water use, that voluntary compliance is a really key piece of how we can protect and conserve the water we had. But as Connie mentioned, there are regulations and legislations in place through the BC Energy Regulator that requires industry to reduce their water use. But if it is a significant problem that it is contributing to an ongoing drought in the Northeast, that is definitely something that we would look into.
Final question today is from Keith Norbury, BC Today. Please go ahead.
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my question. I just wanted to ask, with the changes to how you determine drought, taking out the water scarcity element, on the drought portal, you've got figures from 15th of May up to 10th of July. Is that using the new system or is that the previous system? And as part of that, how are you now able to compare, or are you, the drought levels this year with previous years?
Those are all excellent questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Connie.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for the question. That is a great question. So the information that is still currently up on the drought portal for the previous years prior to 2025 is using the old methodology that had been utilized for a number of years. That data is still relevant, and we do want to keep that data as that gave us the drought level for those years based on that information. With that being said, we are currently working behind the scenes to pull data that we have from those years and other historical data points to be able to do a more consistent translation between the two. And so we are working towards looking at those years, looking at the indicators that we are currently using within this methodology and applying them to that data and pulling out those levels. We're not at a point of being able to share that at this point in time, but that work is underway behind the scenes.
Well, I don't want to blow my follow-up with this because I didn't get an answer to the figures that are on the drought portal from this year, from the 15th of May to the 10th of July. Are those figures using the new system or the old system? That's still my first question.
All data in 2025 is using the new system.
What impact would the current conditions, drought and water scarcity, have on, say, hydro projects? So BC Hydro, they have, for the last few years, there's been drought, and that has required them to buy power from outside the province. Well, do you have any sense of what that situation is like now with the reservoirs the hydro is using, or the power producers generally are using?
Thank you. I will let Connie to answer that, but just to your first question as well, we are going to get historical comparisons using the new system for measuring drought, so we can look at it historically under the new system as well. I know Connie mentioned that, and we will be releasing that publicly, so the media can be able to look at this year, for example, and under the current new system that we're using, compare it to other years, and it'll be an apples to apples comparison. But sorry, Connie, I'll let you answer his follow-up.
In regards to the hydropower question, the provincial staff work really closely with hydropower producers, really to ensure that in-stream flow requirements are being met. So this is to ensure that flows from the dams are being released downstream to support those aquatic ecosystems, health, and the wildlife. In regards to your question about purchasing power, I don't have the answer for that, but what I will say is that within the hydro sector, we do work closely with them in regards to the water use to try and balance out the needs of producing power while supporting the health of the aquatic ecosystem.
Thank you everyone for joining.